Hey everyone, Irene Lyon here. Thanks for heading over to this video, clicking or finding it and watching. I want to start with a story. It's one of my most memorable stories in a training that I was assisting at. So quick context, because it's important. Back in the day, it was 2013, 2014, 2015 through 17-ish. I used to assist at master classes with Peter Levine. Peter Levine is the founder of Somatic Experiencing. This is something that I am trained in along with a host of other methodologies. And at the time, I had a lot of time and space to travel and sit and assist and help in these trainings. And these trainings would often have anywhere from 40 to 60, 80 people in them. And this one specifically, I believe it was in 2013 in Connecticut, I think. And it was covering the topic of depression, healthy aggression, and life force energy. These are important topics in the SE community because one of the things we want to work with when someone comes to us with an ailment, with a stored trauma, with a chronic illness, with a depressive state, is we want to help them get their life force energy back, their vitality. So I'm in this training and it was probably about 6 or so days. And in these trainings, we're in these huge auditoriums. And of course, Peter's at the front and we're all sitting around, and he would have typically one, if not two people would come in per day from the public to work with him as demonstration. So this is one way that we learn as students. We watch the teacher work with another human, and then we have discussion around that, and then the students go and practice little bits of this stuff. Now, I can't exactly remember what was happening that day with the person who came in, but I do remember they walked in and they had what looked like a severe neurodegenerative condition. It might have been ALS, it might have been MS. I really don't remember, but because of the topic, no doubt this person was suffering from depression, probably some forms of chronic illness. He worked with her in the way that Peter does, which is more than just the basic SE model. He's often doing sound, he's doing movement, he gets folks on rebounders and gets aggression going, but also titrates and does very small bits of gentle, laser-focused work. When this woman left, I'll never forget, her walking, while not perfect, was so much smoother. You could see a shift in her physiology. She had less spasticity and hardness in her musculature. Her eyes were able to actually look and see the audience of the students and the assistants. It was palpable, the shift in her autonomic nervous system and how she could use her muscles. So she leaves. And then we have Q&A with Peter. And I'll never forget one of the students in the audience, I believe she was a psychiatrist, said to him or asked him, and bear in mind, this was towards the end of the training. So here we are sitting and watching all these great shifts in the moment. And I'll also add, this woman was not cured of what was going on. It gave her a little space in her system. And that word space is very important. More space in her system so that she could feel a bit more, so that she could ground and connect a bit more. We did not, or he did not, take all of her traumas out in that one moment, and we can't do that. But he provided a little bit of space, a little more flow, we might say the fancy word coherence, resonance, to be able to be less afraid and less, we could say, in a trauma cycle. So this student asks, so Peter, is there anything that SE can't fix? And everyone laughs and you know, it's kind of like a bit of a joke, but it's not a joke because it does help with a lot of things. And I'm going to list, I have a list, 2 pages of things that I'm going to list in a second here that SE and the model at this high level can help with. But he sat there, his legs probably crossed, leaning back on his chair. Often he'd be sucking a Ricola candy with his tea. And he thinks and he thinks and he looks at her and everyone and he goes, maybe ingrown toenail. True story. Everyone laughs because sometimes you gotta bring some humor into these intense intense trainings, because not only are we watching really cool things happen, we hear the history of this person or these people before he works with them. And often he has notes and notes of abuses, harms, accidents, all the medical professions that they've been through, all of the therapists, their hardships, and it's a lot to take in. So we need to have some humor in these classes. So he was joking, but he was also serious. And the reason why it seems like this work has a miracle capacity to it is because it's working at this deep nervous system level. While he did not fix this woman's neurodegenerative condition, we know through a lot of research and a lot of writings over the years, I'm really thinking about Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No. He has written in length and researched this, showing how when we have a lot of adversity, a lot of high stress, when a human is not taking care of themselves and is always people pleasing and is always neglecting their own needs, they can have some serious breakdown in the body. And one of them is the nerves not working properly, and that can lead to a lot of conditions such as MS, Parkinson's, ALS. Now, this does not mean that just because you have stored trauma and you have dysregulation in the nervous system that you will get these issues. But we have seen with, say, for instance, the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, done some other videos and articles on this topic. I'll link them near here. When there is early stress in our lives and it does not get healed, when we stay in a chronic state of fight, flight, freeze, and maybe the next sort of final kick of the nervous system to protect, which is collapse and shutdown, when we stay trapped in this loop, this chaos loop of survival, the body breaks down. It cannot go like that forever. It'd be like taking a vehicle and driving it and driving it and driving it and never getting new oil, never getting new air filters, never getting new brakes and all the things that go into a car to make it run, right? Not protecting the outside. It's just going to rust away. Our bodies are like that too. So what I want to do, I'm going to read a list of things. Now, these things have been taken through multiple sources, a couple books that we study in our work, but also the trainings I've done with Peter in his master classes, where we're going through what are called syndromes. And syndromes is a fancy word for a cluster of symptoms: pain, heat, rashes, digestive issues, lots of body things that happen that don't feel nice. But when we have a cluster of symptoms that persist, we might call this a syndrome. And Peter's work and the model of, we could say, SE, again, at a higher advanced level, working with the life force energy, working with getting traumas out of the system, it can help really dislodge these symptoms such that over time we can heal a syndrome. And a lot of these syndromes are seen from the medical community as not treatable. There's something that a person has to live with for the rest of their life. Now, there's always exceptions, of course, but in my work, in my trainings, in my practice, and in my online courses, I have seen countless people fully heal from syndromes when they get to the root of working with their autonomic nervous system, in the way that we watched Peter on that day back in October of, I think it was 2013. I'm also going to read this long list. It's very medical. It's very jargony. We'll put the names up on the screen so you can see what they look like spelled out. I wanted to put this out there because we often get the question, Irene, can this work help with this? Can this work help with that, et cetera, et cetera? So here is a very long list. I would say this is not everything, but these are the things we hear about the most. So these are, the first list here are directly from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies data and the connections between stored trauma, unhealed trauma in the nervous system, dysregulation of the nervous system, and then what occurs with folks as they age if these things are not addressed. So first one, type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, hypertension, irritable bowel syndrome, cardiovascular disease, morbid obesity, osteoarthritis, anxiety, depression, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic pain syndrome, also maybe called myofascial pain syndrome, addiction to drugs such as alcohol, nicotine, Cushing's syndrome, anorexia, osteoporosis, ulcerative colitis, and susceptibility to certain forms of cancer, namely breast and melanoma. So that is a list straight from a book called Scared Sick. I'll link that below. It's a write-up of that research in really solid layman's terms. It's not dumbed down, but it's simple to read if you want to read more about these conditions and how they connect to dysregulation in the nervous system. All right, the next list is through my trainings, through my many, many notes that I have taken over the years, and also from a book called Trauma Spectrum, written by Robert Scaer. He's passed now, but he was a medical doctor who did research, had private practice, and really focused on the pain cycles that people would have after motor vehicle accidents. He was really interested in what was occurring in a human system that would get all these syndromes, often clusters of them, in one person after an accident of some form of shock. We would call this a shock trauma. So a motor vehicle accident, a car accident, is a shock trauma. Often people go into these accidents feeling pretty okay, and then they come out and then their whole system just crashes. And it's not just from the impact of the accident, it's what the accident unleashes that has been stored in their system. It's like the saying, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so he really, really looked at this in his patients and found that often, if you went into their history, they had histories of various forms of abuse, neglect, often in utero trauma, early developmental trauma, etc. Okay, so here's another long list. Bear with me here. Migraine headache, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD. This we could also be called intense PMS. Peter Levine would often call this a reproductive migraine. Rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, lupus, interstitial cystitis. This is affecting the bladder. Pelvic pain, also maybe known as piriformis syndrome. This is very common in individuals who have had a history of sexual assault and rape. Asthma, hyperventilation, mitral valve prolapse. So this is just an interesting one. This is where the heart has valves. So the heart has valves basically, and they don't close properly. And it kind of flutters blood through and you hear this kind of murmur. So when you say, I have a heart murmur, or if someone says I have a heart murmur, often it's the mitral valve that's prolapsed. But there's a connection to this and a lot of these things. So just bear with me, I'll finish this list. Phobias, so fear of, you name it. OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. Tics, also known as Tourette's. EDS, the long for that is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. This is where the joints are very, very lax and hypermobile. Complex PTSD, complex regional pain syndrome. It used to be called RDS, which stands for reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which is a very intense syndrome that I won't get into right now, but it's a lot of pain, a lot of swelling in the joints. Raynaud's, which also connects to and affects the extremities. This is really, really, really cold hands, but it often flips with heat. So there's this cycling back and forth, and that's a hint to what I'm about to talk to you about in a second. And then the final one I'll add here is POTS, which is unfortunately being talked about way more these days. We're hearing a lot more about this, and this stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. The best way I could describe this is the system's blood pressure and cardiovascular responses cannot keep up with the change in the body, standing up, laying down. It brings dizziness, brain fog. A person just doesn't feel good. And essentially, this is at the level of the autonomic nervous system is being impacted. And then these are the symptoms at the blood pressure level, at the vascular level, the perfusion of blood to the brain or not enough perfusion, all these elements, this is impacting a human. Okay, I'll pause. That was a very long list of things, but I wanted to make this video to name all these things because in the medical community, and by the way, I have nothing against the medical community. There's a lot of great surgeons and doctors that do amazing life-saving work. But when it comes to these chronic conditions, typically someone has trouble with migraines, they get sent to a neurologist. They have trouble with joint inflammation, they go to the rheumatologist. They have IBS and gut problems, gastroenterologist. They have trouble with their bladder, with males, of course, the prostate, they go to the urologist. Skin, dermatologist. Now, that's fine. But in working with thousands of people over the years, I have heard time and time again, and I would put myself into this boat because I have struggled with various forms of inflammatory conditions and myofascial pain. Going to these specialists only typically proves to be medical interventions that suppress the symptoms and don't get to the root of them. Now, sometimes we need some relief. I get that. But what I'm interested in is how can we get under the symptoms, get to the root. So all of these things, one of the things that they have in common, and again, this is through the studies that Peter Levine has done, that I have seen and my colleagues, the system is in dysregulation. We would also call this autonomic dysregulation syndrome. The old word is dysautonomia. It's another mouthful, but you might see that. These are all connected. And what it is showing when we have this dysregulation is our survival responses, I'm going to name them fight, flight, and freeze, and then shut down and collapse. This is the sympathetic nervous system and the parts of the parasympathetic nervous system that put us into shock and shut down. They are working often in what's called a paradoxical, cyclical, on-off way. I used that example of the car a little while ago. If we have that car and we're driving it with full throttle and acceleration, but we're constantly putting on the brake while accelerating, or we're pulling the e-brake, it's going to wear out the system. And so what happens in these syndromes, in these clusters of symptoms, is the fight and the flight are on. This is the fear response. This is the I need to fight and get out of here, but I can't response. This is the I want to scream and shout bloody murder and I can't. This is the I need to leave this home. I need to kick something. I need to do all these protective mechanisms, but I can't because it's not safe to do so. This is classic early childhood trauma. Now, the thing that occurs in these, let's say, children, and then of course we grow up to be big people, adults, is we can only often stay revved in that high sympathetic fight flight for so long. So then we start to kind of dabble into a little bit of the freeze response. And that freeze response is a combination of the sympathetic nervous system and a portion of the parasympathetic nervous system that's helping to slow the system down, but in a way that is survival based. Now, I've done a lot of other videos on this polyvagal theory and how these nervous systems work. I'm not going to get into the full detail. Please look those up. It's important to understand this, and I also cover these in details in my courses, online courses. But for this video today, we've got this sympathetic that's wanting to fight, wanting to run, wanting to protect, but it just can't keep doing that. It's exhausting. So the freeze comes in to kind of shock the system a little bit into a bit of a subdued nature. We would liken the freeze response to that deer in the headlights. Like, I want to run and I've got energy, but I can't. So I'm just gonna stay like this. Typically, we can't live in that state of freeze for too long. Humans have a weird tendency of going one of two ways when they get to that. They either go into a collapse or a shutdown. And this is where a portion of the parasympathetic nervous system comes on and says, we got to collapse you because we can't keep revving at this high fight flight level. The thing that's important to know though, that shutdown has under it the fight flight. To borrow a metaphor from Peter Levine, the tiger is in the bloody cage, but it still wants to fight. It still wants to bite, but it can't. And the energy to keep that tiger at bay is immense. And often at this point of this collapse and shutdown, holding the tiger down, holding our life force energy down, this is where the system gets sick. And the reason why is because we are not going into the rest digest portion of the parasympathetic nervous system. I'm going to slow that down. We need to go into the rest digest portion of the parasympathetic nervous system. It is in that rest digest state that we repair. We have anti-inflammatory things occur in the body. Our gut lining repairs, our tissues repair. We replenish minerals and vitamins and nutrients. They go to the places that they have to go to repair our cells, to improve our immune system. But if we are stuck in this situation where this thing is suppressing the tiger and keeping us collapsed and depressed and in this malaise, we don't recoup, we don't recover, we don't repair. And this is why we see these degenerative conditions happen typically later in life, because the system just can't keep going. The classic book from Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No, is basically the system saying, I can't keep this tiger in here anymore. There's too much going on and my system has to get sick so I can stop and I can rest. Now, we can't just rest in our sickness. We can't just rest in our chronic condition. We've seen that time does not heal these wounds, so to speak. We need to work actively with them. And of course, if I go back to that story at the beginning of this video, this is us in this training learning how to work with people to help them not just release that tiger, because we can't just can't just bring that tiger out and have it start running and biting and chewing and protecting. We want that eventually, but when this human vessel has been so suppressed and depressed, and the system doesn't have the vitality, and it's not just in the energy, it's in the tissues and the vessels. If the system's been in this sort of shutdown mode, it's been out of commission for so long, we can't just get up one day and go run a marathon. We have to build slowly. We have to restore capacity. We have to build foundation. And so that is exactly what I teach in my programs and courses, how to slowly open up the system so that it can digest the changes over time. And then the tiger starts to come out, and then the emotions start to drop, the tears start to flow, the irritation and anger starts to come out that's been, again, hidden and suppressed for so long. So this video is a bit of a story of this concept of, can this work? Can healing trauma, can working with the nervous system, restoring regulation to it, rewiring it, can it fix all problems? The answer is no, but it's also yes. It depends on the situation, the person, the severity of the disease, the condition, the syndrome. I have seen countless folks heal at deep, deep levels. Just like in this classroom that I was talking to you about back in 2013, we saw humans that had so much struggle have just a little bit of spark come back to them. Of course, we don't find out what happens with these people. We don't know. We hope that they continue to work with a practitioner to keep growing their capacity. Typically, when they're that interested to come and be in front of a group of strangers and really be very raw and vulnerable, it shows they're pretty darn serious at getting better. So if you are someone who is living with one of these conditions, or maybe you work with people, or perhaps you're wondering, is this sort of symptom that I have, should I be paying attention to that? Is this chronic, diarrhea, this chronic migraine headache, these problems with me feeling like I have enough blood pressure? Am I dizzy? Do I have brain fog? Am I feeling this listlessness or this constant pain around my body? We're not meant to have these symptoms 24/7. Now, feeling emotion and feeling some pain is part of being a human in this vessel of ours, for sure. But we don't want these symptoms to turn into syndromes. And with time, if we don't work at this autonomic level, at least this is what I've seen in my work, they don't get better. And I don't say this to scare anyone or to be mean. It's just the truth. It's the truth. They do not get better with time. We have to work with our bodies. We need to learn about these nervous systems. I found that education is incredibly important. When we have a human brain involved, we need to understand, why are we doing this thing? Why are we doing this movement? Why are we doing this sound? Why are we looking around and orienting and doing these odd exercises that don't seem to make any sense? The key is getting to know your system, know thyself, but also getting these survival stresses, these trapped traumas, these senses of fear, unsafety out of our system, so that we're not constantly in a state of threat, or the flip side, in a state of shock and shut down. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and I'll just give you a little taste of it. I mentioned we go into fight, flight, freeze, and then shut down. And I said, there's one other thing. Some people collapse into these chronic illnesses, and we know, this person is not well. Right? They're bedridden, they have no vitality, no energy, they can only do tiny bits in their day. The other person, and this was me back in the day, we can sometimes go into what's called a functional freeze. Functional freeze is a trickier one, because when we're in a functional freeze state, we feel just fine. Everything is great. But there might be those little niggly things happening. There might be that little skin rash that just doesn't go away. There might be that chronic constipation that's just kind of always there. There might be this little feeling of shutting yourself down to push and push and push. I've done some other videos on my process of coming out of functional freeze, so I'll pop those probably below here so you can check those out if you want to. But functional freeze is a real thing. I wouldn't say it's a clinical condition that's in the DSM book, but my colleagues, my mentors have talked about this. My students and I talk about this a lot. In our current society, I think a lot of us have to be in a bit of a functionally frozen state to survive, to make ends meet, to raise children, to have multiple jobs, to do all the things we have to do. And again, back to that book I mentioned of Gabor Mate's, When the Body Says No, there comes a point where the system goes, I can't do it anymore. And then poof. And this is where people get really sick, often in their 50s, 60s. But unfortunately, we're seeing this a lot younger these days. So that's another term I wanted to put out there, because when we are in this functionally frozen state, we often hide the symptoms that are happening inside. We don't listen to them because we're cut off from our sensations. We're cut off from the emotion. We're just fine and we're great, but we're not. So I wanted to add that one in because it is an important one. If you want to learn more, I got tons of resources and options to do that. We always put many of those options below these videos. If you haven't yet started with my paid online programs, I do recommend them. They have been used by thousands of people. I think we're over about 20,000 people right now have gone through my programs and courses in over 120 countries. So they have been tried, they have been tested. One has even gone through a scientific study at a university level at a neuroscience lab. So I thank you for your time, and I really do want to encourage everyone to learn more about your nervous system, get into the practices. Again, this is what I teach. And if you are sensing somewhere in you that you've got something that maybe needs attending to, or maybe you have some of these issues, I'm here to say they can be healed, they can be shifted. And I just want to thank everyone for being here and listening. And please share this video. If you know someone who has one of these ailments, one of these syndromes, I do think it's important for us to help others understand and learn. Thanks again, and please drop me a comment if you have a question about this, if you are in this boat, if you're a student and you've shifted and healed these conditions. I'd love to hear from all of you. Thanks again, everybody. Bye for now.